Thank you for not clapping. Sometimes I just wait with a moment of dread to see what that's going to be like. I really appreciate you letting me come and for you being here this week while we're talking about these things. I said this, I think it was my very first lesson when I started talking about this, and I hope that you see what I'm talking about now. The very best thing about Christianity is the salvation that we have through Jesus. I mean, there's nothing in the world that even touches that. To have the forgiveness of sins and a hope of living in the presence of God someday, and there's just nothing better than that. So that doesn't even compare. But if you want to talk about the good things and the great blessings of being a Christian, there are a lot of them. But after our salvation, the family that he's blessed us with is at the top of the list for me. And that's one of the reasons why I like to do things like this so much, because Greg and I have never met before, at least from my memory. I don't think we've ever met before. And you just get to visit a little bit, and it's like, you know, our paths will cross at some point, and now we have another friend. We're brothers in the Lord. We'll see each other somewhere, and it's like, hey, what's going on, you know? And there's so many of you that are like that now. You don't have, there's not an awful lot of Bible nerds at the level of Bible nerd depth that I'm at. But I met one while I was here, and it's like, it's really nice. It's really nice to meet my family, you know, to get to visit with some of you all, and I appreciate it very much. I appreciate the bond that we have. What makes our relationship so special is our bond that we have through Jesus, and I appreciate the good work that you're doing here in this congregation. Mike and Christy have for years. I know that it's not always been an easy road for you all. But here you are, you know, a family of God's people doing the Lord's work. And they talk very highly about you all. They're here for a reason. They wanted to raise their kids with you all here. And so that just makes me so happy to get to at least meet the people that we've been hearing about for a while. So thank you for all of you who have fed me. Very obviously, you have done well. I'm going to have to go home and try and undo some of that, but I'm glad that I've got to spend time with you all talking about my very favorite subject. This is my very favorite subject to talk about in biblical stuff. So we've been talking about family. We talked about what it means to be a family of God's people. There's unity. We're supposed to be together, lock arms, and stay together. The next time this church faces a challenge, I hope that this lesson is meaningful to you. I hope that you're able, as a church family, to stand together, shoulder to shoulder, like a big pack of Cape buffalo, faces facing in the same direction, to work together towards accomplishing the Lord's work and a common goal. I know it's hard. I've got a church family, and I love my church family, but I know it's hard. Like, family's hard, and there's rough things that come along sometimes. But I hope the lesson on unity is something that you'll remember, and that maybe even somebody can stand up and remind you from time to time, hey, let's lock arms. Let's be together as a body of God's people. I hope that you can cooperate together as a family even better. And remember that we're not done with this race until we get everybody across the finish line. That's when we're done. And if there's somebody who hasn't crossed the finish line yet, then we still have work to do. And so I want these lessons to be real and practical. I don't want to waste your time, and I don't want to waste my time. And so what are you going to do to cooperate more as a family together? I was doing these lessons one time in Kansas City And I stayed. We were really, really good friends with one of the elders there, and we stayed, and we were visiting with this guy after one of our lessons, and he looked around, and he goes, "Where are the women?" And all of the women had, after services, like, I don't know how women do this. You have a secret language or something, or maybe they just said, hey. They all organized themselves and went down together that night, and they had a little secret meeting with the women and said, okay, older ladies, how are we going to get to work with the younger ladies? Training the younger ladies. That's the cooperating together thing, that let's go. Let's work together as a family of God's people. Anyway, there's other stuff that we talked about. There's other stuff that we didn't talk about, like families share their stuff. Families have a responsibility. If you're going to live in my house, you're going to live by my rules. And that's the same thing that's true about God and his house. And so there's a level of responsibility. And the idea is, if you're not going to live by my rules, then you're not going to live in my house. That's normally the last lesson that I do, but I didn't have enough time, and I really wanted to talk about this one tonight. So tonight we're going to talk about suffering together as a family. And I know that this will come up. It always comes up. Tonight is suffering together with family. There is a totally different aspect of this conversation that's real. Sometimes we suffer because of family. But tonight we're talking about suffering together with family. And you don't need to turn here. If you want to write this down in your notes, that's fine. But you don't need to turn in your Bibles to this. Romans chapter 12 and verse 15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And this is the thing that I want you to remember about this lesson. I've got two takeaways for you at the end, two practical things for you to leave with. But this is one of the things that I want you to think about more than anything else. On this subject that we're talking about tonight, when suffering happens in the family, when something bad happens to somebody in the church family, whether it's minor in the grand scheme of things, minor. It's never fun, but there's minor suffering or major suffering, like you lose somebody that you love, a parent or a child or something like that. Maybe there's some sort of a health crisis that pops up in the congregation, or somebody loses a job. That's a terrifying spot to be in. This is the thing that I want you to remember about this lesson. We can make lots of mistakes in God's family. You can fail in lots of ways and stub your toe and get up and keep on rolling after that. You can't mess this one up. When we talk about when somebody's suffering, this is game day for us. This is when it's time for God's people to activate and to be there and to be what God created us to be. And I'm not trying to, I want to make sure that you understand, let's exaggerate this as much as we need to get the point across. You can't, we together, we can't mess this one up. People will lose their faith if we mess this one up. You can't, this is one that we have to get right. So, part of what it means to be family is to suffer together. In Galatians 6, in verses 1 and 2, brothers, there's family language. Brothers, bear one another's burdens. So let's say you're carrying a load. And I hear Moses' voice sometimes during Korah's rebellion. And Moses cried out to God and he said, I can't do this. And you can hear the suffering in his voice when he says to God, I can't do this with these people. And and bearing your brother's load is, you got a heavy load on your shoulder right now, so I'm going to come alongside you, and I'm going to use my shoulder to help you carry this load. That's what suffering together as a family looks like. How many times have you gone to a funeral? Maybe it's somebody, like it's your funeral, somebody in your circle, or you're just showing up for somebody else's funeral, and there's suffering and hurt of the highest level, and so you go to this funeral and you look around, and how many times, raise your hand please, I want to see this because I like how universal this is. How many times have you ever said, or have you ever said this sentence, I just don't know how people do this without a Christian family? You ever said that? Look at this. We say that stuff because you look around and you live it and you're like, I don't know how people do this. Right before Becky and I got married, so I don't remember how old we were. I was 20. I was 19 at the time. I didn't become a Christian till I was 17. And so I didn't have any experience with that, of what it meant to, like when somebody says, I don't know how people do this without a Christian family. That's what we did. We just did it without a Christian family. We did it without a network or support. And so the very first time that I got to see Christians in action was right before we got married. Becky's brother died. And that was hard. We were young. He was young. It was one of those things where you're like, this is not supposed to happen. And I remember the hurt. I remember Becky and I were engaged. I remember her hurt, her family's hurt. But what I remember the most about that time was just standing back as a brand new Christian, seeing something that I had never seen before or imagined before in my entire life. And that was watching God's people activate and do what they do. Somebody from church, one of Becky's dad's best friend, was on a business trip out of the state somewhere, and he canceled his trip and flew home that day. And I just remember I was like, seriously? Like, that's awesome. And to watch a house fill up with people, and they just come through, and you've never seen so much food in your entire life. And everybody, it's like, I don't know what we're going to do with all this food, but it just keeps coming. And then whenever we had his funeral, to watch the people at the funeral home see, okay, here's what's happening in the funeral home, and here's the line, and the line goes out the door, around the building, down the driveway, and the people at the funeral home are like, what is going on? I've never seen this. And I'm standing there and I'm like, I've never seen this either. Those are the kinds of things that cause us as a family of God's people to be special. We have something that other people in the world don't have. So let me go to a couple texts here. I want to talk about a couple different things. First of all, I want to talk about what it means to be a confessor. It's kind of important that you know. No, it's not important. You could live the rest of your life and not know this, and you'd be just fine. If you want to turn over to Hebrews chapter 10, probably most of you know, like, you know the word martyr. You know what it means to be a martyr, but maybe not. A martyr is somebody who has been killed for their faith. But if you're if you're suffering for your faith, but you haven't been killed yet, you're not a martyr yet. You have to die in order to be a martyr. So if you're suffering for your faith, like if you've been arrested because you're a Christian and you're sitting in jail, you're not a martyr, you're a confessor. That's what the early church said to these people. And so what it was like to be in a Roman jail, this is a quote from that church's family book that I was reading from earlier this week. To survive in a Roman prison, a person had to depend on his family to bring him the necessities of food and clothing so he could stay alive long enough to face his accusers. For the Christians, the church was their family. And that's the case whenever we get to Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 32. I love these texts. I hope, I don't know. So those of you who came to our highlighting thing, and I was really deliberate about highlighting stuff like highlighting is structure, highlighting is pay attention to words. Sometimes a text in the Bible is just so beautiful that I highlight it because I like it so much. And this is one of those times. So, chapter 10, Hebrews chapter 10, starting in verse 32, recall the former days when, after you were enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings. This is what I like so much about this. It's in this verse. Sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, and then check this out. And sometimes being partners with those so treated. I like that text because sometimes it's your turn to suffer and walk through the fire, and sometimes it's my turn to suffer and walk through the fire. But no matter whose turn it is to walk through the fire, you're not walking through the fire alone. If it's your turn, if you're suffering and afflicted, I'm going to be a partner with you in this time. And if I'm suffering and afflicted, you're going to be a partner with me. But the point is, nobody's walking through the fire alone. In verse 34, for you had compassion on those in prison. And he goes on to explain even more what it was like to live as a Christian in this environment. I think you get the point, but you only have to turn your Bible a couple times to chapter 13, where you see the same thing. And since it's so close, let's just read another one. Chapter 13 and verse 3, remember those who are in prison. And then this is the part. This is what I want you to see. Remember those who are in prison. Listen. As though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you also are in the body. I told Olivia that I wasn't going to tell this story since she's here, but I'm going to anyway. We talked about it in the van. And she was like, normally I'm banned from telling stories about my kids. But this one is so, it means so much to Becky and me. We went, when Becky was pregnant with Olivia, we went to her 20-week appointment to get a sonogram and find out if Olivia was going to be a boy or a girl. She's a girl, it turns out. But that was number 3 for us, so we've done it a couple times up to that point. And when they were doing the sonogram with Becky, this sonogram took just a little bit longer than all of the other ones. And I was just sitting there the whole time like, man, this lady's really slow. But I looked over at Becky, and she was crying. And she knew like something was not right in this sonogram. And the lady, sometimes, I know medical professionals, like they do the best they can, but sometimes it's, let's do better. That's kind of what I think. But that lady's response was, I can't tell you this, but I need to go get a doctor right now. And it's like, cool, just leave us in the room for however long. And the doctor comes back and they do more sonogram. And Becky's in full panic mode right now. At this point, and the doctor says, okay, it looks like your baby has spina bifida. We had never even heard those words before. I don't know what that means to say that your baby has spina bifida, and it was terrifying to us. And it was a Wednesday night. We left the doctor's appointment, and we went and we sat in the car, and we cried before we left. I'm not totally emotionally constipated but sometimes we cried on that day. And this is one thing I want you to remember about this story. Neither of us wanted to go to church that night. I didn't feel like it. I just found out something bad. This is not what I want to do. But I was the preacher and I was teaching class and I had to. So we went to church that night and I stood up and I said, okay, we found out that we're having a girl, but there was a problem. And this is why I'm telling you this story, because of the verse that we just read, this concept. Remember those who are in prison as though in prison with them. I said, but there was a problem. And there's a lady who sat right about where Haley is on the back right of the building named Doris. And I said, there's a problem. And Doris, she was an older lady. Doris went, oh no! And it was just as comical as that, as she shouted it out and moaned it as I said it. But to this day, I can hear her voice, and the reason why I tell that story, I said it to Becky on the way over here. I promise you, that woman felt every single bit of pain that we were feeling in that minute. And we left on that Sunday night, and we said to each other, I'm really glad that I came to be with God's people tonight. I didn't feel like it, but that was where we needed to be that night with our family. Okay, all of that is introduction. Two things about suffering together. Turn over to Job chapter 2 with me, please. Job chapter 2 in just a minute. I'm going to read from Job 2 and verse 11. So, I only need you to remember two things. And for each of you, you could probably be okay with remembering one depending upon where you are right now. I only need you to remember two things from this lesson. Everybody can do that. Two things. But they're really important, and I need you to remember this one. Number one, when suffering happens in our family, we have to show up without fail, and we can't mess this up. Christian family is awesome and great. It's my favorite subject to talk about. But when suffering happens, it's game day and it's time to activate. And that means you're probably going to need to drop what you're doing. That's really important. And it means that you're about to be in some really uncomfortable territory because nobody ever knows what to say or do. You have to. You have to do this. You can't mess this one up. In Job chapter 2, starting in verse 11, we see a story about people that I relate to very, very much. Because it's kind of a joke in our family, and it's definitely a joke in our church family. I give people a hard time, and they give it back even harder. And this is one of the things that people tease me about. Sometimes when I'm standing here talking to you, sometimes women start to cry when they're talking to me. And when that happens, I don't know what to do. So my response is normally, and Becky's a great wife. She's used to it. But normally, this is what I can muster for you in that moment. But you don't have the words. Like, when somebody's telling you something really horrible or they're walking through the fire in this moment, I don't know what to say. Oh, hey, Ryan's the preacher. Let's send him. He knows what to do. No, this is the secret that everybody knows. Nobody knows what to say. I don't know what to do right now. I don't know what to say right now. And that's why this passage is so important in Job chapter 2 in verses 11 through 13. When Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they came each from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite, and they made an appointment to gather, to come, to show him sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads towards heaven. And then listen to this. This is important. Especially men, if you're in the same boat as me and you're like, what in the world? What am I going to do? What am I going to say? I have nothing to say in this situation. In verse 13, and they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. And at this point in the book, they're still his friends. In fact, I would consider them really great friends. What am I supposed to say right now? Don't say anything. But you have to show up. That's the great thing about this story and what we see from Job's friends. They came and they sat with him and they cried with him, and nobody said anything like, well, God has a reason for everything, and there must be a reason for this. Please don't ever say that, please. Or this is the thing that sometimes people will do. Well, God must think that you're really tough, because he would never send a trial to somebody who couldn't handle it. And it's like, I just lost my parent. Please don't say. In fact, this is the truth from this text. Maybe just don't say anything. But you have to show up. That's not optional. It's not. In August of 2019, I am the chaplain for the Ellisville Police Department. It's connected to. We worship at the Ellisville Church of Christ. It's the Ellisville Police Department, same city. And one of my jobs as the chaplain is to show up when things are nasty. Police officers do a lot of stuff that's gross, but sometimes things are nasty. And it's nice when someone's there. So that's part of my job. And so I got called out in 2019 to this call. This girl, it's August. She's about ready to start her senior year of high school. Great family, beautiful girl, has her whole life ahead of her. But that morning, her boyfriend broke up with her. So she went home and got her dad's gun out of his drawer, out of his dresser drawer, and went into the bathtub and shot herself in the head. And so they called and said, hey, can you come here fast? And so I went there. And one of the things that we've discovered, my job is supposed to be support for the officers, but one of the things that we've discovered is the way that I can support the officers is they get to go and sit in their car and I can stay in with the family. And so the first thing that I say when I see this family, well, we have training for this. So the very first thing that I'm supposed to say is, I'm so sorry that this happened to you. Just memorize that line. It works in every situation. It's true. I'm so sorry this happened to you. But the first words out of my mouth is, do you have a church family that I can call for you? That's what we're thinking, right? We got to get the church going in a situation like this. And they said, yes, we go up to St. Louis Family Church. And so I go, okay, get in Google, look at the number, call St. Louis Family Church. It's like 5:05, right at the close of business hours. And so I get this, thank you for calling the St. Louis Family Church. Our hours are 9 to 5 and whatever. Press whatever to talk to a receptionist. So I push whatever and I say, hey, I'm at the house of some of your members and this thing just happened and I need to talk to someone. And the receptionist, I'm not mad at the receptionist. Like she doesn't know. She said, okay, do you need somebody to call you back tonight? And I was like, yeah, that would be great. And so I waited for about an hour and somebody finally called me back, and his pastor, whatever his name is. And I said, hey, listen, this is what happened. And I'm at these people's houses and they go to church. And he goes, oh yeah, I know them. I know that family that you're talking about. And I told him the whole thing. And we're finished with the conversation. And he says, so do you think someone needs to come out there tonight? And I was filled with probably unchristianary rage at that spot. Because it's like, what are you even talking about? Does someone need to come? Someone should have been here an hour ago. Whenever we started making these phone calls. There's 1,000 of these. I know this is not story time, but whatever it is you need to do to hear this story. In 2022, we found out that Dad had cancer, and he made it for about a year. But my mom sent a text to my sister and I, and she said, hey, Dad's got cancer. We just got the word. I don't want to talk about it right now. I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk. And my sister called me, and she said, what do I do? And I said, go. And she said she doesn't want us to go. And I said, get in your car right now and go. And that's the point of this story. Always go. Don't ever not go. Always go. But I just want some privacy right now. Still go. I'm telling you right now, that's the thing. Knock on the door. Don't step inside. I'm really sorry that this is happening to you right now. I just want you to know that I love you. And then leave. Fine. But still go. Always go. We have to show up for our hurting family without fail. And the reason why this is so important is because I bet every person, at least who's lived for 5 minutes, every person in this room has heard this or something just like this. My mom died and not even one single person called me. And that's the excuse that they give as they're walking out the door and they're leaving the Lord and they're never going to see him again. Yeah, but I know the yeah buts. I know the yeah buts. But still, you have to go. Please, would you remember that? Please. You always have to show up. Always show up. Go to 1 Kings chapter 19. There's a second thing that I want to tell you about this. As you're turning there, there's 100 different ways to have this conversation. What if somebody loses their job? Okay, well, I probably don't need to come to your door. Always send $100 or $20. It's not about the money. It's the thing that I'm telling you. It's about letting that person know that they're not going to walk through the fire by themselves. I'm going to walk through the fire with you this time. Always show up. Number two that I really want you to remember from this lesson is that if it's your turn to hurt right now, you are not alone. And you don't have to be alone. And maybe nobody knows about the hurt and you're suffering and you're doing it by yourself. It was not meant to be that way. You don't have to walk through the fire by yourself. And so I always think about 1 Kings chapter 19 and verse 14. This is Elijah. He has just been condemned by Jezebel, and he is literally running for his life. And so as he's running, there's a whole bunch of things that happen. Chapter 19 and verse 14 is a really good example of this. He said, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. Elijah is running, and he's calling out to God, and he says, I feel alone right now. There's no one else left. He was wrong about that. In fact, if you look down verse 18, God helps him to understand, and this is an important part of this. I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal and every mouth that has not kissed him. One of the things that God tells to Elijah in this situation is, no, you are not alone. But when he felt that, that's where you go over to verse 19. And starting in verse 19, maybe you can just see it from the heading of your Bible. This is not accidental. This is the spot where God gives Elisha to Elijah. And it happens right when he feels alone, and he says, Elijah said, just kill me. I don't even want to live right now. And God's response was, well, the first thing, it's kind of a joke. Get some food, get some sleep, get back to work. But the thing that he says to him after that in verse 19, so he departed from there, and he found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke. And so you read about this story of God saying, Elijah, I understand that this is really difficult for you, and so I'm going to give you Elisha, and you don't have to do this by yourself. That's the point. And if you keep on reading a little bit more through the text, what you're going to find is a couple of other prophets who pop into his life. And the reason is to help us to understand that this is not something that we have to do by ourselves. Now, this is a really important part of this lesson that I need you to understand. And don't get mad at me when I say this. There's probably a better way to say it, but I'm not that guy. You have to use your grown-up words, because I'm not a mind reader. All right, if you're sitting in your house suffering and hurting legitimately, and you're just seething with anger because Ryan hasn't called you, it's probably because Ryan doesn't know that you're hurting or that you would like a phone call. And so part of this is, you got to let me know. You got to let somebody know, hey, I lost my job and I'm really scared right now. Hey, we just got a cancer diagnosis, and this is going to be a long year and a half that we're looking at. Great, activate. But we can't activate if we don't know. So the first thing is, please, I don't know. I'm asking you. This is me asking you for a favor. This is one of those things that happens way more than I would like. And it seems like, maybe you could confirm, it seems like this is more and more and more and more popular. And I think this is a bad trend. Let's stop this. I've got a biopsy coming up, and this is a scenario, it's not me for real. I've got a biopsy coming up in a week, and I don't want to say anything about it right now because I don't have any answers to the questions, and I don't want to deal with all of this stuff. I'll just wait till I have the biopsy, and then I'll get some questions. And that's not how family operates. You let me know that you have a biopsy coming in a week, and we activate the family, and we pray as hard as we've ever prayed for good results to come out of this biopsy. We're going to knock heaven's door down to make sure that God knows what we want from these biopsy results. And in the meantime, while you're stressed out and suffering about what it's going to look like, we're locking arms with you. You don't have to do it by yourself, is the point. That's the point. That's the thing that I want you to understand. So, two things, two main takeaways. You absolutely have to show up. If you've made this mistake in the past, get up and try again and never make the mistake again. You can't fail. And number two, you don't have to do it by yourself. Let's go to Matthew 26. There's three more passages that I want to read, and then I'll wrap this up. One of the things about Jesus' story, while we talk about this, one of the things about Jesus' story that is really heart-wrenching, especially in light of what we've been talking about, but it's just, even if you are not keenly awake and aware about walking through the fire with your people, with your family, even if that's true, some of the things that you read about in the Passion narrative with Jesus are just really heartbreaking. Matthew chapter 26, starting in verse 36, the heading above the text is Jesus prays in Gethsemane. And I'm not going to take some time to read that, but if you just skim down through the text, this is where Jesus says to his inner circle, to those closest to him, hey, I really need you to pray with me right now. And he goes and he prays and he comes back and they're asleep. It happens. We all make mistakes. But he wakes them up and he says, please would you pray with me? I'm asking you the second time. And he goes and he prays and he comes back and they're asleep again. And he wakes them up and he goes and he prays and they're asleep again. It is the actual definition of not being there for your people whenever they need you. Look over at Mark chapter 14 and verse 50. In Mark chapter 14 and verse 50, I don't know why I missed this text for so long. When Judas led the soldiers out to arrest Jesus, and there's the whole Peter with the sword incident that happens. But just, would you notice verse 50? Look at what verse 50 says. And they all left him and fled. How do you suppose that felt? To be Jesus and here comes the mob after you, and all of your closest family and friends turn around and run away and leave you by yourself to deal with it. I hope that you read those words, and they all left him and fled, and I hope it runs a dagger right through your heart, because that is not the way that it should be. And then in Matthew chapter 27 and verse 46, some of the last words that Jesus cries out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Have you ever done this? This is what happens sometimes when we talk about this text. My God, why have you forsaken me? And someone says, well, God didn't forsake him, because if you read the rest of Psalm 22, that's what's supposed to happen, is you're supposed to know the end of the story and all of this. And it's like, okay, I'm not trying to have a theology debate with you right now. He's literally nailed to a cross and bleeding and suffocating to death. Probably it's not that hard to understand how you might feel like God had forsaken you in that moment. He felt alone, is the point. He felt alone. And this is the main takeaway. This is the thing that I want you to remember from this section. And that is that Jesus suffered and died alone so that we don't have to be. He died in order to give us a family of God's people. And so when it's time for one of us to suffer and walk through the fire, from this day forward, I'm sure this is not true for this congregation, but if it ever has been this way in the past, never again is somebody going to do it by themselves. It doesn't have to be that way. Jesus suffered and died alone so that we don't have to. Through his death, we can be a part of God's family. And you see what that family looks like. Thank you so much for studying the Bible with me and talking with me about real life things. I hope that this has been helpful for you. If you're here tonight And you've been listening to these lessons, thinking about family, and you think to yourself, you know what? I want that. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe this is just completely me being on another planet. I think when we talk about the family of God and being a part of this great family of God's people, I think that if we can live this in the way that we're supposed to, it is one of the most evangelic things that we can do. Because people in the world see it and they say, I want that. I want that for my life. I want that for my family. And if that's you here and you've been talking about this family and reading about this family and hearing about this family, it can be yours. All you do is die to yourself. All you have to give up is everything. Die to yourself. You come up here tonight and you let us know. You let us know right now, I'm ready to die to myself and to come to God through Jesus, and listen to this, to be born again. That's what it means. I'm going to bury the old dead self, and when I come up out of the waters of baptism, I'm going to be born again into a new family. We can do that right now. If you want to obey this gospel message, come forward as we stand.